His fingers moved smoothly down the spreadsheet, but the numbers blurred before my eyes. I couldn't concentrate. There was something about the way he carried himself, deliberate, steady, confident, that made my breath hitch. Grant had been handling our financials for the past 3 years, but something about tonight felt charged. The office was completely still. Just the soft hum of electronics and the two of us, alone, surrounded by shadows and silence that seemed to lean in. The tension built with every stolen glance. When he looked up and caught me watching him, he didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled, a subtle, knowing curve of his lips that made my stomach flutter. "These numbers," he said quietly, his tone velvety and calm, "they tell an interesting story." I leaned in as if to get a better look at the screen, trying to convince myself that I was still present, still focused. But all I noticed was how the scent of his cologne mingled with the fading warmth of the evening, how his shoulder gently pressed against mine when he reached for the mouse. The heat from that light touch lingered longer than it should have. The quarterly reports were scattered across Grant's polished mahogany desk like constellations, structured, intentional, but to me, they barely registered. My eyes weren't following numbers anymore. They were drawn instead to the roll of his sleeves, the way his forearms flexed with every movement, and how his dark hair caught the lamplight just right. He'd been stealing glances at me all evening while we sifted through my husband's business accounts, but it had stopped feeling like work a while ago. "Mrs. Taylor," he said, his voice low and slightly rough, just enough to stir something deep in my stomach. "I think we need to talk about some irregularities." I shifted in my chair, slowly crossing one leg over the other. I noticed how his eyes followed the motion, his focus no longer just on spreadsheets. "What kind of irregularities?" I asked, though I already sensed this wasn't just about the numbers. "The kind that require very careful handling," he said, tapping a line on the report. But his eyes weren't on the document. They were on me. "Some things," he added, his tone slowing, thick with double meaning, "can't be rushed. They need the right touch, the right approach." The space between us had been shrinking with every shared breath. Every time he handed me a document and our fingers touched, something stirred. Every accidental brush at the keyboard only deepened the silence filled with things we weren't saying aloud. Lately, my marriage had begun to feel more like a well-balanced ledger, stable, predictable, but utterly lacking heat. It had become another box checked, another task completed. "Maybe you could show me," I murmured, rising from my chair and moving to his side of the desk, letting the edge of my voice dip into something bolder. "I want to understand what you're seeing." He turned to face me, and suddenly I was standing between his knees, close enough to feel his warmth, to see the flecks of gold in his eyes that I'd never noticed before. "Taylor," he whispered, and hearing my name in that voice sent a soft tremble through my spine. "The books can wait," I breathed, reaching up to brush my fingers along his cheek. "Can't they?" His response didn't come in words. His hands slid around my waist, drawing me down into his lap, my legs straddling him as if we'd done this 100 times before. When our lips met, there was no pretense, no restraint. The man who'd been methodical and composed all evening vanished. What was left was hunger, raw and unfiltered, pouring out after weeks of tension crackling beneath the surface. His hands slipped beneath the edge of my blouse, exploring the bare skin at my waist with a tenderness that burned. I arched into his touch, awakened in a way I hadn't felt in months. Every brush of his hand was intentional, each movement calculated with a kind of precision that made it impossible not to respond. He seemed to know exactly what to do, like he'd been quietly studying how to unravel me. "We shouldn't," I whispered against his neck, even as my body leaned closer, craving more. "Tell me to stop," he murmured, his lips grazing the delicate line of my collarbone. "And I will," but I couldn't say the words. I didn't want to. Instead, I reached for the buttons of his shirt, my fingers trembling with urgency. One by one, they came undone, revealing warm, firm skin beneath. I slid my hands across his chest, feeling the tension in him respond to my touch. A soft groan escaped his throat, low and deep, vibrating between us. The office around us, its quiet hum, the glow of city lights through the windows, the neat stacks of paper, faded into nothing. All that remained was the closeness between us, the heat, the ache. His hands moved to the small of my back, expertly finding the zipper of my skirt. The soft sound of it lowering felt deafening in the stillness. "You're incredible," he whispered, voice husky and filled with hunger. His hands moved slowly, reverently, exploring each curve, each inch of skin like it was a map he was determined to memorize. The same care he gave to every financial detail, he now gave to me. I stood just long enough to let the skirt fall away, the fabric cooling at my feet. When I straddled his lap again, the only thing between us was a thin scrap of lace and the thick, pulsing tension that refused to let go. The pressure of him beneath me sent a sharp gasp from my lips, my head tipping back as sensation rolled over me. His mouth found the hollow of my throat, soft kisses trailing along my skin while his fingers worked deftly at the clasp of my bra. When it slipped away, he didn't move right away. He looked at me, deeply, like he was taking in something he hadn't expected to find. Beautiful, he whispered, before lowering his head to taste the skin he'd just exposed. His lips, his tongue, each warm stroke set fire to nerves I'd forgotten existed. The tension swelled, urgent and unbearable. I reached down between us, fingers working at the buckle of his belt, then the button and zipper. He lifted his hips just enough to help, allowing the fabric to fall away. Nothing remained now but breath and anticipation. "Are you sure?" he asked softly, his forehead resting against mine, his voice the only thread of hesitation. I didn't need to speak. I shifted my hips, positioning myself slowly, carefully, letting him fill me. The moment he slid inside, my breath caught. The stretch, the pressure, the fullness, it was everything. He filled places in me I didn't even know had been empty. We moved together with a growing urgency, our bodies locked in a rhythm that made the chair beneath us creak in protest. His hands held my hips firmly, guiding each motion as I took control, letting myself feel powerful, needed, desired. Every shared breath, every soft sound, wound the tension tighter, pulling us closer to that inevitable edge. I lost myself in the way he responded to me, the way he gasped, the way his fingers pressed into my skin like he never wanted to let go. It wasn't just physical, it was the feeling of being fully seen, fully wanted. "That's it," he whispered, his voice raw with need. "Let go for me." And I did. Release crashed through me like a wave breaking against the shore. My body trembled as I collapsed into his chest, breathless, overwhelmed. He wasn't far behind. I felt him tense beneath me, arms clinging tightly as he found his own release, my name leaving his lips like a prayer. We stayed like that, tangled together, breathing hard, hearts still pounding. The weight of what we'd done settled around us like the deepening shadows in the room. Eventually, I lifted my head and looked at him. His hair was tousled, his eyes still dark with the heat of it all, but softened now by something gentler, something that made my chest tighten unexpectedly. "The reports," I said quietly, glancing around at the papers strewn across the desk and floor. "They can wait until tomorrow," he murmured, his hand stroking lazy circles against my back. "Some things matter more than numbers." But even as I leaned into his touch, reality started to creep back in. My husband would be home soon, waiting for me to return from what he believed was just another routine business meeting. The wedding ring on my finger seemed heavier now, a silent reminder of everything I'd just betrayed. "I should go," I whispered, though I made no move to pull away. "I know," he replied softly. But his arms remained tight around me. Not yet." We kissed again, slower this time, lingering in the moment we both knew couldn't last. When we finally separated, dressing felt almost like donning a disguise. The clothes fit the same, but the person inside them felt changed, unsettled. Grant walked me to the parking garage, his hand resting lightly at the small of my back. At my car, he turned me gently, lifting my chin with his fingers until our eyes met. "This doesn't have to be the end," he said, his voice quiet but certain. "Your books will need regular reviewing." I couldn't help but smile, even as guilt flickered beneath the surface. "Is that your professional recommendation?" I asked, half teasing. His eyes glinted with mischief. "Among other things," he murmured. His thumb brushed across my lower lip, and I had to fight the magnetic pull urging me to close the distance between us again. The drive home was a blur, city lights smeared across the windshield like watercolors, my thoughts racing faster than the tires on the road. What had I done? What did it mean? And more pressing, what was going to happen next? When I walked in, my husband was in his study, absorbed in his work, barely registering my presence. I kissed his cheek. He responded without looking up, mumbling that dinner was in the fridge. Alone in our bedroom, I changed out of the clothes that still carried Grant's scent. As I passed by the mirror, I caught a glimpse of myself. My lips were slightly swollen from his kisses, and my skin still glowed with the aftershocks of his touch. I looked like a woman who had been thoroughly loved. And I felt it, in every nerve ending, every breath. That memory had embedded itself deep into me. Morning came, wrapped in routine, coffee, casual conversation, and clinking dishes. But nothing felt the same. My husband mentioned needing to schedule another session with the accountant, and I felt my heartbeat quicken. "I can take care of that," I said, aiming for a tone of nonchalance. "Save you the trip," he nodded absent-mindedly, already distracted by a spreadsheet on his laptop. He didn't notice the way my fingers curled slightly in excitement or how my breath caught. Somewhere inside, I knew something essential had shifted. The careful, predictable balance of my life had tilted. And I wasn't sure I wanted to tip it back. My phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with a message from Grant. "Found some additional items that need your attention. When can we schedule a follow-up?" I stared at the words, heart pounding. I could still pull back. I could chalk up last night to a moment of weakness and return to the safe, monotonous life I'd built. But as I recalled the sensation of being so fully wanted, so unmistakably alive, I knew my answer before my fingers moved. "Tonight, same time." The hours dragged on unbearably slow after that. I caught myself checking my reflection in every reflective surface I passed, fingers ghosting across my lips when I thought no one was watching. I played the memory of the night before on a loop in my mind, over and over, each time setting my skin aflame. When evening came, I told my husband I needed to finalize some paperwork with Grant. He didn't question me. He didn't even look up. Lost in his world, he missed the way I carefully styled my hair, the subtle tremble in my hand as I picked up my purse. Grant was already waiting for me when I arrived. The moment I stepped into his office, the air changed. It was electric. There was no mention of spreadsheets or numbers this time. We collided like forces drawn together by instinct, his mouth on mine, his hands everywhere, desperate and unrelenting. "I've been thinking about you all day," he whispered against my ear, his breath hot as his fingers skimmed the curve of my body through my dress. "Show me," I replied, my voice already laced with need. He didn't hesitate. With a tenderness that made my heart flutter, he led me to the couch tucked in the corner of his office, easing me down like I was something sacred, something worth worshipping. He undressed me with deliberate care, his mouth trailing after his hands as if imprinting devotion into every inch of my skin. There was reverence in the way he touched me, like I was something rare, something worth savoring. And when he finally entered me again, it was with a slow, deliberate intensity that made every nerve stand at attention. The tension between us built gradually, like a crescendo waiting to break, every movement more focused, every sensation more vivid. We moved together with the unspoken grace of dancers learning each other's rhythm, hesitant at first, then perfectly in sync. This time was different. It wasn't just about the urgency or the heat. It was deeper. It was discovery. We explored, we learned, we uncovered the places that made each other tremble and gasp, the sweet spots that pulled sighs from our throats and made our bodies arch together in wordless connection. When it was over, when we lay wrapped around each other in the afterglow, I felt something inside me had shifted. "What are we doing?" I asked softly, my finger drawing idle patterns along his chest. "Living," he said simply, as though it was the most obvious thing in the world. Maybe for the first time in a long time. And in that moment, I knew he was right. What I'd been craving wasn't just passion, it was to be seen, to be truly wanted. That feeling had been gone from my life for far too long. But what we had wasn't simple. It was thrilling, yes, but also tangled in danger and the looming shadow of consequence. "My husband," I began, a whisper of guilt threading into my voice. But Grant reached up and silenced me, pressing a gentle finger to my lips. "He's a lucky man," he murmured. "But he doesn't need to know how lucky." The drive home was harder than before. My stomach churned with guilt, but beneath that was something darker, more addictive, satisfaction. I knew I was playing with fire, but I'd forgotten how good it felt to burn. In the weeks that followed, our business meetings became a regular occurrence. Every encounter left us more insatiable, more reckless. We grew bolder, more creative, driven not just by lust but by the intoxication of being utterly consumed by one another. Grant peeled back layers of me I didn't even know I still had. With him, I wasn't just a wife. I wasn't just someone's shadow. I was a woman with wants, with hunger, with the power to take what she craved. In his eyes, I was radiant. In his arms, I came alive in ways I hadn't felt in years. But the higher we climbed, the more precarious the fall became. There were close calls, moments when my husband asked questions about the accounting work I had to bluff through. Slips of the tongue that I caught just in time, where I almost revealed something Grant had told me in confidence. The fear of being found out was constant, but strangely, it only heightened the rush. One night, wrapped in the warm cocoon of his embrace on the office couch, Grant traced slow, lazy circles along my shoulder. His voice was soft, thoughtful. Do you ever think about what this could be? If things were different, I had. More than I was ready to admit. But allowing myself to think about it meant acknowledging truths I'd buried, how empty my marriage had become, how much I craved these stolen moments, how thoroughly Grant had reignited something I thought was long dead. Something that, once awakened, I wasn't sure could ever be silenced again. So instead of answering, I turned to him and asked, "What would you want it to be?" "Everything," he said simply. That one word lodged itself deep in my chest, heavy with both promise and peril. It wasn't a proposal, it was a possibility. Everything meant more than lust behind closed doors. It meant dismantling the life I'd built, confronting the truths I'd buried, and daring to want more. More than routine, more than obligation, more than numb contentment disguised as stability. As I drove home that night, city lights reflecting off the windshield like flickers of temptation, I realized something undeniable. Grant hadn't just reviewed our finances. He'd reviewed me. He'd recalibrated a part of my soul I hadn't even realized was off balance. He reminded me of what it felt like to be wanted, to be touched with intention, to be seen. And now, the question wasn't about what I'd done. It was about what I was going to do next. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of a woman I barely recognized, flushed, eyes lit with something dangerously close to hope. She looked like someone who had just uncovered a truth she couldn't unlearn. The real fear wasn't whether my husband would find out. It was whether I had the courage to keep living a lie, or the courage to chase the kind of life that made me feel alive. Some risks are worth taking. Some balance is worth disturbing. The numbers in my life had never added up to happiness before, but now I was starting to understand that some equations matter more than others. What would you have done in my position? When passion collides with responsibility, when desire dares to challenge duty, how do you choose? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one and your insight means more than you know. And before you go, don't forget to like this video and hit subscribe. It's completely free, takes just a second, and ensures you never miss the next story. Tap the notification bell too, so you're the first to know when a new one drops. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.